Right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the January 2024 Psychosis Coalition meeting. Happy New Year. Nice to see you all on this side of the future. Um, we're excited to have you all today. So for those who are not sure, we are the Connective C Coalition. Our focus, we're funded through the Orange County Healthcare Agency and the Mental Health Services Act to promote existing mental health resources for transitional age youth here in the county of Orange. And so we're excited to have you all join us. Part of that work is hosting this monthly meeting where we aim to better acquaint you all and equip you all with the resources that are out there. And the resource we're highlighting today, I'm really excited to share with you all, is Thrive Together OC. Our presenter, our speaker will be Dr. Jason Schiffman with UCI and with Thrive Together OC, as well as Chung Nguyen with Thrive Together OC, where she'll share about some of the work they do, and Dr. Schiffman will share about some of the what led to that, some of the research and work that they're doing on a broader level, including some research at UCI to identify the importance, or better clarify and support the importance of early intervention around early signs of psychosis for transitional age youth, how important early intervention can be, what early intervention looks like, and why that's something we should be really focusing on as a community, why it can be really impactful and life-changing for not only those youth, but their families and the community as a whole. So without further ado, Dr. Schiffman, well, actually, forgive me, I should introduce myself and my team, my colleagues, and then I'll introduce our speakers today. So my name is David Pattison. I'm the project coordinator for Connective C Coalition. And to clarify that Connective C Coalition is also a program under the umbrella of Partners for Wellness, an agency you all may be well aware of. We do a lot of good work out in the community around substance use prevention, mental health, and DUI education. So I'll pass it on to my colleague Crystal, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks, David. Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for joining us today. I am Crystal Leisher, Program Director with Partners for Wellness and Connective C. Sarah, I'll toss it to you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Sarah Chalice, and I'm one of the health educators on the team. Vivi, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Vivi Boone. I'm also one of the health educators on the team. Camila?
Hello, my name is Camila, and I am also a health educator, and I'm also the intern.
Carolina, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, she's just joining our team.
Hello, I'm Carolina. I'm an intern for OC Connect.
So one of the things I neglected to mention is we'd like to know who else is in the room here. So if you can take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat, share about who you are, if you're with a particular organization, what organization you're with, what brings you to the meeting. And if you'd like folks to be able to contact you outside of the meeting, please feel free to share contact information. We'll also have some opportunity later in the meeting to share about anything you all may have going on, events or resources that you'd like to promote. And then, of course, throughout the presentation, if you have questions, we encourage you to place them in the chat. We'll have a dedicated time for question and answers at the end of Dr. Schiffman's presentation, but we will gather those questions as we go. So that way, I know how it goes, sometimes you think you'll hold on to a question, you forget. So encourage you all to share those in the chat. And then, without further ado, Dr. Schiffman, I'd love to introduce you to our attendees.
Thanks so much, David, and thanks everyone for being here. First, I just want to express my gratitude and appreciation for David as a person. I think we met over the summer at a conference, and I was really struck by David's authenticity and kindness, and I felt really grateful that we connected during that day. And he gave me his business card, and I put his business card on my desk and left it there for like many weeks, thinking that I need to get in touch with David. And sure enough, he reached out to us. And so we connected in that way. So I was moved and therefore very excited to be here and also to hopefully intersect with the coalition directly because I think our missions overlap in many ways. As we are very passionate about supporting the mental health of our community, and in particular some of our most vulnerable brothers, sisters, and siblings, which I think coincides with what you all are trying to do, and most likely coincides with what everyone in this Zoom is attempting to do as well. Now, what I do with my partners Chung Nguyen and Elizabeth Tunerman, who are here as representatives of Thrive Together OC, along with my team at University of California at Irvine, is to try to support young people who might be on a trajectory towards developing serious mental health concerns related to psychosis, disorders such as schizophrenia. Because in a nutshell, we think that if we can find folks early on in their trajectories, work with them before somehow I got muted. Did you hear like all the brilliant things I said while I was muted?
I think we missed maybe the last probably 2 sentences, maybe like 5 to 10 seconds worth. Yeah.
All right. So that was the best part of it. But I don't remember what I was saying. But I think what I was trying to communicate is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure in the field of psychosis, and that if we can find young people or even transition aged or young adults before they develop serious mental health concerns related to psychosis, we can alter their trajectories in really positive ways and partner with them to help them lead a life of their choosing, a life in the community, a life that they want to lead. So that's sort of like the overview of my of the topic that I want to cover. I have some specifics to give you a more of a detailed sense as to the types of folks that we serve that are struggling with the types of challenges that we are sensitive to. And then towards the end, Chung will have some information about resources and ways to get in touch with us. But I will say like sort of the end part first, which is Thrive Together OC offers comprehensive specialized assessment in the evaluation of whether or not a person might be at risk for psychosis. We also offer consultation. So we'll talk about particular clients or folks that you're working with. And we do our very best to help connect young people with resources in the community. And the last thing that we do is to offer trainings like this. So if within your organization, outside of the confines of this presentation, might benefit from some of the remarks that you'll be hearing today, then give us a call and connect with us in that way as well. And then hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll be able to offer psychosocial services, treatment services for some of these youth as well. But that's what we're working towards. All right, so let me pull up some slides. All right, so here's a basic overview of what I want to share. Overview of psychosis and risk for psychosis. And I'll talk about both, and you'll see that there's some overlap there. We'll talk about signs of risk and screening, because I think it's probably, if there's one practical or tangible thing that I want to communicate today, it would be the value of screening and some ways in which you can use some basic screening strategies to help identify folks that might be struggling with psychosis risk symptoms, and then an overview of treatment strategies. But mostly I'll just focus on like what you can do. And I have a little trick on that. All right. Before I get into some of the research and the specifics that I want to cover, I wanted to set the stage with a story of a family that we worked with at one point. We'll call them the Smith family, although that's not their real name. But Miss Smith called me and started discussing her family. She had 2 children. She had a son, Thomas, and a daughter, Jane. Now she reached out to me to talk about her daughter, Jane, but before that, she talked about, she shared with me what was going on with Thomas. Now, Thomas was, during that call, was the time of that call, he was in his late 20s, living in the outskirts of the county, really disconnected from society. He had dropped off society's safety net. He didn't have insurance. He was unemployed. He was without stable housing. He wasn't really talking to anyone. His functioning had deteriorated across all domains, and he had been ascribed a diagnosis of schizophrenia. He'd also separated himself from just about everyone, including Miss Smith. And in her words, she would describe it as having, quote unquote, lost her son. Now, there's always room for hope and opportunities for recovery. But in the case of Thomas, it was harder to see that, especially for Miss Smith. But she really was primarily reaching out to me to discuss the circumstances surrounding her daughter Jane. Now, Jane was a bit younger. At that time, she was, I think, a junior, almost a senior in high school, and was poised prior to that moment to go to college. But around that time, she started having some symptoms. She was deteriorating in functioning in terms of how she was doing in school and her social connections. And Miss Smith was worried that Jane might have been sort of going down the path of Thomas, especially as she began to develop some unusual thoughts and ideas of suspiciousness that were further alienating her from others. Um, but luckily, we were able to connect with Miss Smith and subsequently Jane, as well as her school, and also wrapping in some natural supports like her very supportive family members and her friends. And we created an intervention plan that seemed to connect with Jane. And now we can't necessarily say that we were the cause or this plan was the cause for Jane's rebound, but I can say that Jane recovered and was able to reach her goals. Within a few months, she was back on track. Now, I think that one of the most important circumstances or attributes within this plan for Jane that helped support her success was the fact that we were able to work with her early, before the symptoms of psychosis really took hold, such that she had insight and motivation and was willing to dedicate all of herself towards towards a recovery or a position in life that was better than where she was when we first began working with her. So that's the story of Jane and Thomas. And we are really interested in finding folks that are more in Jane's situation so that we can work with them. Now, when we do this, we need to be thinking about, well, what is psychosis and schizophrenia, and how do we recognize the signs and symptoms that a person might be on this trajectory towards developing more serious mental health concerns related to psychosis? So just a little bit of level setting and definitions here. So schizophrenia is thought of as the hallmark disorder associated with psychosis. Now, I talk about psychosis a lot, well, sometimes as a precursor to schizophrenia, sometimes as a syndrome that is generally speaking a part of schizophrenia. But psychosis itself is really a term for specific symptoms, which we'll define here. A severe mental disorder in which or syndrome in which contact with reality is lost or distorted. Now, I like this second definition here. Psychosis is characterized as disruptions to a person's thoughts and perceptions that make it difficult for them to recognize what's real and what isn't. And in this way, I think this is a very like personal, humanized way of thinking about psychosis. So there's something that's disrupting a way in which a person thinks and how they perceive the world that challenges their ability to distinguish real from imaginary or what's in their head or not real. And I think when you think about it like this, it's much more person-centered and allows for an understanding that this type of or these types of disruptions could lead to the hallmark symptoms of psychosis, which are defined or which are hallucinations and delusions. Now, these hallucinations and delusions are often considered quote unquote positive symptoms of psychosis, not positive because they represent something good, but rather positive because they represent behavioral excesses or things that you wouldn't expect to have from a typically functioning person. I mentioned delusions. Delusions are ideas that are held onto tenaciously despite evidence to the contrary. False and fixed beliefs. So here's some examples. I think people are talking about me. Someone is following me. People are talking about me to plot against me. And aliens are sending me messages through the TV. I chose these four examples purposely because they represent a continuum of experiences. So you can see that I think people are talking about me. This is something that for many and most people, when it happens, it's not a false belief, it's a true belief. But there are elements of this that connect to the other ones as we move down. Same with someone is following me, slightly less common, but something that does happen. Also something that happens when, or that someone has this belief when it's actually not happening. Now, people are talking about me to plot against me, becomes even more unlikely that this is real. Aliens are sending me messages through the TV, unreal, a false belief. The reason why I like to draw a theme or represent the continuum is because I feel like if we think about psychosis symptoms on a spectrum, we can create more of a connection between people with psychosis and without psychosis. And that connection, I think, will facilitate a more inclusive community whereby people that are on the far extremes who are having trouble with psychosis symptoms will feel less stigmatized by their experiences and more likely to reach out to get the help that they need. So those are delusions, some 4 small examples. And then the second positive symptom that's one of the hallmark symptoms of psychosis are hallucinations. These are perceptions in the absence of sensation. Hearing voices is the most common, oftentimes reported as the most distressing as well, depending on the nature of the voices. And then psychosis is also characterized by the expression or the experience of negative symptoms. Negative representing behavioral deficits that you wouldn't necessarily expect otherwise. Blunted affect, alogia, asociality, anhedonia, and avolition are the 5 core traditional negative symptoms. Blunted affect is relevant to mention in that it's the expression of emotion. So like with me, I'm like gesticulating and, like my nonverbals through my face are animated. My affect is expressive. With a person that has blunted affect, those types of expressive uh, signs of expression and communication are blunted, or so you don't see it. But I think what's important here is that oftentimes for people with psychosis, the experience of emotion, what they're really feeling on the inside, is just as vivid and animated as anyone else, irrespective of their status of psychosis. It's just the expression that's challenging. So what that means clinically is it's important to check in. So if you think someone might have blunted affect, ask them how they're feeling. If you're feeling like they're not connecting with you, or they're not jibing or laughing when you say something silly or whatever, check in. They might be experiencing it even if they're not sharing it. Alogia is a poverty of speech, so not talking as much. Asociality is social withdrawal. Anhedonia is the inability to enjoy things, and oftentimes this is conceptualized in the context of social experiences. So like, like at a party and not having fun and not really understanding why. And avolition is like motivation or lack of will or having a hard time getting things started or following through with things. The impact of psychotic disorders in some ways is hard to over describe or overemphasize. Approximately 1 to 3% of the population across the world develops a psychotic disorder, depending on how broadly you define the psychosis spectrum. This equates to about 100,000 adolescents and young adults developing a first episode of psychosis every year in the United States alone. So lots of folks are succumbing to illnesses related to psychosis, and the impacts are quite staggering. One of the most appalling statistics in this field is that folks with a diagnosis of schizophrenia have a reduced life expectancy by about 20 years. So individuals who have a diagnosis of schizophrenia are likely to die 20 years younger than their folks in the general population who don't have psychosis. There's many contributors to this. One is an increased risk of death by suicide. So people at risk for psychosis in particular, who still maintain some insight and awareness as to their mental health struggles and challenges, will report feeling things like they're losing their mind or they're going crazy. This can lead to a lack of hope and subsequent increased risk for suicide. And this is one of the priorities that my team and I at UCI, in collaboration with Thrive Together OC, are really sensitive to. We have ongoing projects to reduce death by suicide among people with schizophrenia. Quality of life is also impacted. So too are folks who surround and support people with psychosis. Family members report a lot of distress and functional deterioration within their context. Independent functioning and educational attainment also impacted for people with psychosis. And it's a costly disorder as well, with estimates. And this is a pretty old estimate this is a 2016 study from 2012. So over 12 years old, $155 billion per year. Despite all these challenges, I will emphasize on this slide the following. Folks who experience psychosis, many can and do lead full and successful lives and report positive changes as a result of their experiences. We call this in this field recovery. And I think one of the most important potentiators of recovery is finding folks early in their mental health journey, partnering with them, and helping them to alter their trajectories in ways that will allow them to lead a life that they want to lead. So early intervention really makes a difference. Now, here's a few myths about psychosis and schizophrenia. that I'll just share briefly. Most of you are probably familiar with them, but regardless, I think it's important for us as mental health leaders to be able to communicate anti-myth messages when we sort of run into these things in the community. Multiple personality disorder, psychosis is different from dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder. It's not distinct personalities that sort of take over a person, but rather it is oftentimes characterized by those positive symptoms that I was talking about, like hearing voices or having unusual beliefs. Now, this myth came about probably because of the word schizophrenia, which the literal translation is split mind, schizo, split, phrenia, mind. But Bloiler, the person that coined the term schizophrenia, really meant it to be like a split from reality or the tethering of a connection with what's real and what isn't. Another one is that a majority of people with psychosis or schizophrenia are violent. This is perpetuated by media on like a daily basis. The truth behind this is that folks with schizophrenia are not very violent at all. And if you parse out, on average, and if you parse out the impact of substance use, many people with psychosis are only just modestly more likely to be violent than people in the general population. The substance use and other factors are far more important drivers of violent behavior. One thing I'll mention here, though, it is a nuanced topic. Excuse me. And there are some symptoms that will lead to increased risk of violence, even though that increased risk is modest. And those symptoms often involve people feeling like they're being controlled or they're being threatened. And if anyone had the feeling that they were being controlled or threatened, they would be more likely to engage in violent behavior. And that's no different for people with psychosis. But again, risk is pretty modest. All people with schizophrenia are without housing. This is also not true. There is an increased risk of or increased prevalence of psychosis and serious mental illness among people that don't have stable housing. Some estimates put it as high as 30%, but the range is probably somewhere between 11 and 30. But the truth is that that means that the majority of people that are without stable housing do not have psychosis. And also on the flip side of this, the majority of people that have psychosis are not without housing. Many are living, with family members, in the community, independently, with friends, whatever. So that is a myth, although it's also a concern. Another myth is that folks with psychosis or schizophrenia can't do well in school or in jobs. And actually, this is something that's emerged and changed for the good over the last 10 or 15 years with the advent of supported education specialists and supported occupational specialists. So there's more investment in finding work and education that people with psychosis are excited about, and then supporting them in their efforts to attain their goals, as opposed to in the old days, which was just sort of in some ways almost giving up on people, and then maybe training them a little bit, but then wishing them well after the training. Instead, we provide ongoing support, and that seems to make a big difference for a lot of folks. So all these are myths. They get a giant PowerPoint red X. Another thing that I think is important to share is this idea of connection that I mentioned before, and how folks with psychosis are far more similar than they are different from people without psychosis. And this came up to me many years ago when I was doing some trainings, and people were like, Jason, I understand what it's like to be depressed. I've been blue or down or whatever, been really sad. I get what it's like to be anxious. Like, I get nervous when I talk in front of people or whatever, if I have to do something big. I get those feelings, but like, I don't understand psychosis. That seems fully different from me. So then I started thinking, well, if people have that belief, then they're going to have this notion that it's sort of an us versus them if they don't have psychosis themselves. And I again don't think that's healthy for a society whereby inclusivity and getting people to reduce stigma, such that people don't internalize stigma if they have a condition, such that they are not afraid to get treatment, is really important. So I came up with these ideas that I shared to create connection. So for instance, how many of you have had dreams that felt so vivid, and then when you woke up, you were sort of confused as to whether or not they were real or not real? For me, this happens pretty frequently. Thanks, Kat. And like I found one time I had a dream that I found a like a really nice digital camera in my dream. And in my dream, the camera didn't have a battery. So I woke up and I went to my phone to buy a battery on Amazon or whatever. And luckily I didn't hit the like, one click buy now button, but I came close to that until I kind of snapped out of it. Another one related to dreams is the hypnagogic and hypnopompic parts of our existence, our experiences. This is like when we're falling asleep and when we're waking up. These are times that are associated with a bit of a lucidity. Sometimes I'll hear my name being called. Sometimes people report like feeling like they're floating. This experience within humanity is so common that in the DSM, it says if a person endorses symptoms of psychosis, make sure you ask if it's only in the context of falling asleep or waking up, because if it is, it's not a psychopathology, it's just typical. Cell phone ringing. How many of you have heard your cell phone ringing and it wasn't ringing, or felt it vibrate when it wasn't vibrating? Sometimes I'll feel my cell phone vibrate when I'm not even having it in my pocket. This is so common that it was actually at one point a question within the gold standard interview for diagnosing risk for psychosis, but everyone was saying yes to it, so we had to take it out. Hearing one's name called, no one around, like, like someone called Jason. Seeing a shadow or a tree and thinking it's a person. This is common too. For me, what always gets me are like fire hydrants. I always think they're like little kids, like I see in the corner of my eye, like, oh, and then it's a fire hydrant. The experience of deja vu, very common. Seeing a group of people and thinking they're talking about you. Less magical than the other ones, but very common, especially for our younger clients from middle school to high school. But true, I mean, to whatever grade I'm in. All right, and not being able to enjoy things sometimes. This is consistent with a negative symptom of anhedonia, like going to a party and just seeing everybody have a great time, and you're kind of like leaning up against the wall, thinking like, why am I not having fun here? The last one I think I have here is, how many of you have ever felt confused before? I know that I have, and I think this is a universal feeling. It may be more prominent among people with psychosis, but it's something that we can all relate to. I will say this, the real life experiences of psychosis, far more challenging, interfering, and distressing than simulations or analogies that I'm sharing here. But the point here is to suggest that these symptoms exist on a continuum. We can all relate at some level to that continuum. And by doing so, we create the space for a more inclusive community, more empathy, to allow for more people to get the help that they need. Onset of psychosis generally occurs between like 15 to 25, a little bit younger for on the younger side of that range for boys or young men, and a little bit on the older side of that range for young women. Risk for psychosis coincides with this window as well. And that's why the work that Elizabeth and Chung and I do focuses in on this range of the developmental window, transition age youth or emerging adulthood, late adolescence, etc. This is the time to pay attention. I'm sure all of you are aware of this, but it's a transition time for transforming parent-child relations, independence, questioning things, being critical and sometimes skeptical, the ideas of peer pressure and invulnerability, and then beginning to make big decisions like medical and life decisions. Like Thomas, from the Smith family, he made some decisions pretty early on that when he was 18, 19, 20, that had implications for his long-term health that his parents weren't really allowed to kind of intervene on because he was an adult. And if we think about this trajectory of time and psychosis, there are some important epochs or periods of time within the passage of time towards the development of psychosis. And within this context of the passage of time, I want to introduce this concept referred to as the duration of untreated psychosis. And this is really the motivating factor for all that we do at TTOC. It's very much in keeping with my original messages, whereby I said an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If we can find folks early, we can help them in ways that we wouldn't otherwise be able to. So if you imagine the arrow is the passage of time, and the three boxes within are just phases that precede the development of psychosis. And at this point in time, let's say this is the onset of psychosis. Some time passes, and then we have the start of treatment. The duration of time between these two time points is referred to as DUP, or the duration of untreated psychosis. And appallingly, in our country, DUP lasts just under, on average, 2 years. So that is to say, on average, people with psychosis are walking around untreated for their mental health concerns related to psychosis for 2 years on average. That can mean many people are much longer than 2 years. This is where where I met Thomas. He had gotten treatment well further along in after his symptoms of psychosis had emerged. And at that point, he was fully unmotivated to engage in care and had no intention or desire to connect with services that could have been transformative and helpful for him. If we push the needle of time backwards, we see here the onset of risk. And this is where we were able to connect with Jane. Whoops. And because of this, and in circumstances like Jane's, we think that we're able to, in some ways, maybe prevent, well, let's say forestall or delay psychosis for individuals that are destined to develop psychosis. Or if not forestall psychosis, maybe mitigate its ultimate impact by having care wrapped around the person already, because we're working with them in their risk range. And in some cases, and maybe in the case of Jane, be able to prevent psychosis from ever emerging in the first place. By working with people in the risk phase, we can reduce the duration of untreated psychosis to essentially zero, because if they develop psychosis, we can connect them with specialty care for psychosis right away. The reason why this is also important is because the duration of untreated psychosis, this time between onset of psychosis and the beginning of treatment, is associated with just about anything negative that you could possibly imagine. Things like worse long-term outcome, more intensive services, negative symptoms, social impairment, occupational, educational impairment, distress, and likely increased costs and burden to the system. The longer the duration of untreated psychosis, the worse off outcomes are predicted to be. And this is not an accident. Like, this is common sense in some ways. Because bad things happen without early intervention, such as obstacles to entering the system, like in Thomas's case, losing insurance and lack of motivation to engage in care. Also, actually, I didn't mention this with Thomas, but he had during his like in his 20s, he had some pretty bad experiences with treatment, interaction with the justice system that led to him being less inclined and less motivated to get care later. Other folks sometimes are hospitalized, and the hospitalization can lead to aggressive medication treatments that can leave a person with like side effects that are somewhat traumatizing to them as they're being sort of sedated. Both of these experiences can lead to a decrease in motivation for future services. And miscommunication as well. I mentioned the idea of hope earlier on, and it's harder to identify and to share messages of hope when someone is further along in their mental health illness, as Thomas was, than it is in situations where Jane was. There's other things that contribute to long duration of untreated psychosis as well. And this has to do with not just how we train mental health professionals, but also how our mental health systems of care are established. In fact, I think it's the mental health systems of care that drive how our training is devised, our curriculum for mental health professionals. But you see here, youth-focused mental health staff, folks that are specialized or get specialized training in working with young people, like child mental health care professionals, they tend to be undertrained in schizophrenia spectrum related disorders and psychosis. They get great training in developmental considerations, great training in working with families, great training working with schools and the like, but not a lot of training in psychosis. Meanwhile, our professionals that are more adult focused, good training in psychosis oftentimes, but less sensitivity to working with families or schools and developmental considerations. And all of this is in the context of mental health and educational systems that are split right around 18, adult and young and child serving agencies. And all of these factors could lead to longer duration of untreated psychosis as our young people who are transition age youth or emerging adults, sort of are falling through the cracks at this time when they are at greatest risk for psychosis. So there are lots of factors that contribute to long duration of untreated psychosis, like, for instance, people being unfamiliar with psychosis. And solutions to that are abound as well. And that's why I'm actually grateful that you all are here listening to this talk and learning about some of these things. You probably had a familiarity with these things as well, but your commitment to continuing to learn and grow, I think, will go a long way in reducing DUP for some of our most vulnerable clients. Not probing for psychosis. And I'm going to give you some tangible tips for this as well. I'm going to share some screening questionnaire ideas and how to begin a conversation with somebody that might have signs of early psychosis. Clients choosing not to disclose symptoms due to stigma. Now, I've already mentioned about the value of reducing myths and increasing the connectivity between all people, irrespective of your status related to psychosis. This will, I think, allow people the space to get the help that they want and need. And in professionals feeling unequipped to help and specialized services not integrated into the right settings. One of the messages that I'm going to share at the end of my remarks is that the mental health strategies that you already employ effectively with young people that don't have psychosis or are not at risk for psychosis are likely going to be your first line of defense and effective strategies with working with people that do have psychosis or are at risk for psychosis. Because as I've already tried to emphasize, people are far more similar than they are different. Therefore, the skills of connection and the therapy strategies that you've used in the past are likely going to be a great place to start for people that have additional challenges related to psychosis. And an increased access to specialty care. Well, Thrive Together OC is attempting to be part of that solution by creating services that that aren't currently in Orange County that we're growing to meet the needs of this particularly vulnerable group of people. Okay, now moving on our outline, you see here now we are going to talk about signs of risk. The first thing that we look for when we're thinking about risk for psychosis, not full psychosis, but risk for psychosis, is actually symptoms that you would look for full psychosis. But we're looking for slightly less expression of severity, more insight as to whether or not the experiences are real, less impact and distress that are associated with them. But the questions are very much in keeping with positive symptoms of psychosis. So for instance, perceptual abnormalities, like are your thoughts so strong sometimes you can almost hear them? Have you ever seen things that others don't see and find this distressing? Do you sometimes get distracted by distant sounds that you're not normally aware of? These questions are sort of probing at hints or signs of perceptual abnormalities that could be indicative of future development of full threshold hallucinations. So I wanted to read a vignette with you that I think illustrates some of what we might look for in perceptual abnormalities. Now, perceptions aren't the only risk sign for psychosis, but is the one that I'll just use for illustrative purposes today. So Gina reported that beginning 3 months ago, she began to see wispy figures out of the corner of her eye, but when she would turn to look, nothing would be there. She also reported that occasionally she sees someone sitting in the rocking chair in her room, and at the time it's happening, the person appears very real to her. She additionally reported hearing sounds that no one else can hear, like the door slamming or muffled conversations. She'll look to see if someone could be making the sounds, but no one is ever around when she does. She reports that these instances are distressing to her and do frighten her. She'll often keep the light on to help with her fears. So when we're looking at something like this, we try to break it down to assess whether or not this is an experience that's noteworthy such that it would be indicative of psychopathology. There really is a difference between an experience related to psychosis and an experience that is further developed such that it becomes a symptom or meets criteria for psychopathology. The first thing that we want to do is get more information about the nature of the experience. So if we were working with Gina, I might suggest trying to openly ask her more information about, for instance, seeing wispy figures out of the corner of her eye, or someone sitting in the rocking chair in her room, and then hearing sounds that no one else can hear, like the door slamming or muffled conversations. All of this would be my first line of inquiry. Like, tell me more about these things. Now, in order for us to distinguish whether or not these experiences are limited to just being experiences, or if they meet threshold for some sort of psychopathology, we look for factors such as the intensity, whether or not it's distressing, and if it causes any behavior change. In this case, corner of her eye, that doesn't seem too intense, but when she's talking about the rocking chair, it appearing very real gives us a sense of a level of intensity there. And then she reports that these instances are distressing to her. So we have distress right there, and frightening, another indicator of distress. And then some behavior change with her keeping the lights on. So all of this is suggesting that these aren't just potential experiences that have no meaning to her, that are just sort of passing, but rather they're impactful in her life in a way that's somewhat negative. So this is giving us a sense that this could be on the risk phase of psychosis and not just experiences. Another factor that we look for is the novelty. Is this something that's new, or is this longstanding and stable? If it's longstanding and stable, we conceptualize it a little bit differently. Like, this is just part of how the person is, and if it hasn't been all that problematic for them in the past, then we don't worry about it quite as much. However, if it's new or unfolding or unraveling in the recent past, usually we think about the last year, then we're more sensitive to the potential of a downward trajectory and an emerging risk towards more serious illness. Okay, so that's just a sign, one sign for perceptual abnormalities. There's also unusual thoughts and suspiciousness, as well as grandiosity, and also some communication challenges that can be associated with risk signs. But we don't have enough time for me to cover everything, so I wanted to go into something more practical, and this is about screening. Screening for psychosis can be great. In a nutshell, screening can reduce duration of untreated psychosis by finding folks early. And once someone is found, we can use screening to continue to monitor how their symptoms are doing, in addition to other benefits that you might find in screening. Now, the screening tool that we endorse within Thrive Together OC is called the Prime Screen. It's just 12 items, and each item is rated on a 0 to 6 point scale. I'm going to share with you the first 4 items. I think that I've felt that odd or unusual things are going on that I can't explain. And then you see across, like, definitely disagree all the way to definitely agree. And then underneath that, we have an opportunity for our clients to rate how problematic it is. When this happens, I feel frightened or concerned. So like that distress that I was talking about before, or causes problems for me, interference. And again, they're offered the opportunity to rate it from 0 to 6. Another example question is, I may have felt that there could possibly be something interrupting or controlling my thoughts, feelings, or actions. 0 to 6. And then, is this frightening or causing problems for me? 0 to 6. That distress and concern part is really helpful for a number of reasons. But if it's an experience, then we don't pathologize it. But if it's an experience that causes some challenges, then it becomes more likely to be psychopathology. Just real quick, these screeners are effective and helpful, and I recommend them, but they have their limitations. And so they can't just be used blindly. This is just from a study that we put out a few years back, where we found that the screening tool that I'm sharing with you now, the Prime Screen, was very effective for the participants in that study who were white, but was not as effective for our participants who were Black. So it doesn't mean it doesn't work for people who are Black, but and it doesn't mean that it works for everyone who's white. But statistically, we need to be mindful. And I have hours of presentations about cultural considerations in the assessment of psychosis risk. But in a nutshell, cultural sensitivity is important. And I'll give you a tip as to, like, one small tip as to how to attain or reach towards that sensitivity. But first, I want to leave you with, in the screening section of our time together, the most practical and tangible thing that I have to share today, which is this. If you don't want to use the Prime Screen, or you don't have access to it, or whatever, there's just a 2-item version of screening risk that we distilled from the literature and through factor analysis that I recommend, and TTOC recommends that you can use. So do you ever hear the voice of someone talking that other people cannot hear? And have you ever felt that someone was playing with your mind? And even if you don't memorize these questions, but you kind of like have a sense of them, and you ask your clients something along these lines, that's totally fine. The point of it's not like the exact wording that matters, it's concepts that you're communicating. And the point of screening, and also this very like modest 2-item screening, is to develop the opportunity or to create the opportunity for a conversation. If someone says yes to one or both of these items, ask them why. If they give you some information that's related to psychosis or psychosis risk, there's a good chance that additional screening or assessment may be useful. And if you're not comfortable with that, then just reach out to us. That's what TTOC is here for. A lot of times people say yes to these items, especially the second one, playing with your mind, and we'll give you some reason why they said yes to that. That's unrelated to psychosis. That's totally normal and fine. But if you're able to find someone that says yes to this, and it's because of psychosis or psychosis risk, you may have changed their lives in unquestionably positive ways. All right. So for those who score high, the most important thing is to have a conversation, learn more, be empathic and warm and curious as to what they're experiencing. Then create a plan for how you might work with them. Most folks that are at risk for psychosis can be effectively cared for by their existing providers. They don't need to be referred out to a specialty care provider. However, if the challenges that they're expressing become the priority and you as a clinician or the clinicians that you're consulting with feel like it's outside of their area of expertise, then the next step is to refer to a specialty care. Okay, so let's see. Let me here we go. So treatment considerations. I'm trying to be mindful of time here. I've mentioned a lot of these things already, but this notion here that we're all more similar than we are different. The reason why that comes back into play in the conversation about treatment considerations is that, as I mentioned before, the clinical strategies that folks employ for people without psychosis risk are likely going to be effective for those that are at psychosis risk. Very rarely in my career has anyone come to me and said, Dr. Schiffman, I need help with my attenuated risk symptoms for psychosis. Rather, they say things like, hey, I need help because I'm depressed or I'm anxious or I'm losing my friends, or I'm fighting with my family, I'm failing out of school, I'm gonna get fired from my job. I don't know where my next meal is coming from, and I'm not sure where I'm gonna sleep tonight. These are the challenges that beset many of our clients. Um, and they're really only tangentially related to symptoms of psychosis risk. These are their priorities that they share with us. And so as a result of that, these being their priorities, addressing the psychosis risk symptoms could be tertiary to addressing those more prominent needs. So I suggest creating an individualized approach that marshals the strengths of the individual, that highlights and identifies and then prioritizes their priorities and work towards their goals. Do so in a way that's culturally responsive. You have conversations with people and ask them sort of what do these things mean to them and why. And that allows for you to be individualized, culturally responsive, and without need for specialized intervention services, because the challenges that they want help with are challenges that you're probably already well equipped to manage. Now, if you want to talk through some of the challenges especially the ones related to psychosis risk, then give TTOC a call. That's another thing that we do. We do evaluations and we do consultations to support these very needs that I'm articulating here. Okay, so your toolbox, things that you can use: educational support, psychoeducation, social skills, family, ensuring safety with an effective safety plan. All these things probably already strong in. So the tools you have: monitor their symptoms of psychosis. You can use the prime screen or even those 2 items. And when your tools aren't enough, of course, consult or refer. But really, I think if there's anything that's helpful, it's the warmth, the empathy, the connection that you probably convey, or that the people that you consult with or the therapists that you refer to convey to their clients. That's where the real action's at. All right, I just had a couple of thoughts about housing instability. I'm just gonna it's housing instability and psychosis. I'm gonna go through this pretty quickly. But there was a major shift in hospitalizations that began in the 1950s. Mental health hospitalizations began to be sort of questioned from a legal perspective, and this concept of least restrictive settings sort of began to emerge in legal settings. And in large part, this was like driven by like I think good intentions from many people, whereby there was an idea, or there was a notion that many mental health hospitals, or quote unquote asylums, were not offering effective care, were offering care that was um, uh, d- um, that supported like health inequities across different racial groups, and wasn't effective. And and there was a humanistic belief that people with mental health concerns should have the chance to live in the community, which I 100% believe in and agree with. However, what happened was people, like, hospitals were closed, and there wasn't effective step down or transitions within the community. So even though the notion was good, the implementation was terrible for many, many people, and this led to an influx of folks being kicked out of hospitals who were still in need of care and weren't effectively stepped into the community. So, and this kind of went on through the 80s, and now we have between about 11 to 30% of people that are living without stable housing have serious mental illness. Now, the statistics don't always like parse out how much of that is schizophrenia or psychosis, but it definitely includes psychosis, but also includes like major depression and the like. So, so I'd say it's probably, well, it's probably somewhere in between 11 to 30, depending on the sample, depending on how you define being without a stable housing, and depending on how you define psychosis. But SAMHSA came out with this substance abuse mental health services, or mental services health administration. That might be wrong. Reported that 3.4% of all state mental health clients nationwide resided in homeless shelters at some point during the previous year. So that's a lot of people. The literature on sort of like the nature of this relationship suggests it's probably there's probably like some bidirectionality here. The stress of not having stable housing probably leads to an increase of symptoms, or and because we think about psychosis as a result of some sort of biological vulnerability interacting with stress, but also having symptoms may make it harder to live with others, or live in a community, or keep full-time employment such that you have resources to maintain housing and the like. So bidirectional relationship likely. Among those at risk for psychosis, residential instability, which is sort of defined in different ways, but it's associated with the development of psychosis. So this is a small study from the largest study of people at risk for psychosis, but what they found was people that moved a lot and had some challenges within their neighborhoods were more likely to develop psychosis if they had this pre-existing risk for psychosis. This is a podcast that might be interesting to some people. If you're interested in my slides, I will share them with David, and people might want to give that a listen. But David, how are we doing on time? Should I stop now? I have actually completed all like the educational parts, and then I had like an exercise, but I can also stop. This is a good time to stop and open it up for questions and make sure that I don't monopolize all of your time together. So I'm totally open to whatever works best for you all.
Why don't we do that for time's sake? We'll open it up to questions. We'll hear a bit from Chung in terms of some of the services that you all are offering, and then we'll go from there. I think yeah, we're running a little low on, not too low on time. We'll see where we're at, but
Okay, perfect.
time. Yeah. So yeah, so why don't we first off, Jason, thank you. That was fantastic. I really especially appreciated the analogies that you presented, and also to me, I think even just breaking down a little bit in kind of typical or more familiar language what some of the symptoms of psychosis are like, and how they present was really helpful in terms of just thinking. I think it can be really helpful in terms of starting to break down some stigma. And I think about blunted affect for one, right? When somebody's interacting with someone who has who's experiencing psychosis and has that blended affect, there's a certain kind of very typical human evolutionary attachment response where if I'm trying to connect with someone and I can't perceive what's happening for them emotionally, it feels really disconcerting for me, right? But the reality is, as you point out, that person, it's a symptom of the experience of psychosis. That person still is as emotionally animated and experiencing a range of emotions as anybody, but it's just not translating to their affect. And so helping that to me can be a really helpful way of humanizing that person's experience and helping me see that they're not help go a long way, I think, for not misinterpreting somebody who's experiencing psychosis as inherently threatening by their presentation. I do want to open up to questions from anybody. So feel free to post your question in the chat, or feel free to do the little hand raise icon, and we'll call on you and convey any questions to Jason.
So I did see, to kick things off, I saw a question from Steve. Steve, I'm thankful that you're here. And Steve is asking about the average time in the UK and Australia to like essentially to reduce duration of untreated psychosis, I believe. I am not a part of the particular project, MHSOAC, to bring a US standard. And in fact, I mean, actually, even just the measurement of duration of untreated psychosis is kind of variable. So, like some people, like how do you define like the onset of psychosis is in question sometimes, and then like when is like treatment initiated? Is it when like a good effective care is initiated, or is it when a medication is begun? So that kind of gets in the way. I will say that I am a part of some multi-site studies that are that are some other sites in UK and Australia. And really the Australians, when it comes to psychosis and probably like mental health in general, are like leading the way. So I think as a nation, we are kind of like a few steps behind them, but I take a lot of my cues from them. And one of the things that I love about them is speaks to David's prioritization of anti-stigma approaches, where a lot of their mental health services are offered at like places that would resemble like a, you know, like a YMCA for us, where it's just sort of open up and like people are playing ping pong and, you know, it's like, it's just sort of like part of the culture, which is such a beautiful, I think, part of it all. And they also think about things from more like the sciencey term is like pluripotent, but it's like this idea that it's not just about psychosis and psychosis risk. So, you know, in TTOC, we talk about like psychosis risk in a very narrow window, but the reality is the boundaries of mental health concerns are pretty permeable. So people don't just have psychosis risk and only develop psychosis. You know, they might have trouble with bipolar disorder or with depression or with anxiety, and all of this speaks to the person as a whole, and you know, I'm a real big proponent of understanding the context that surrounds people. So it's not just like, you know, what's going on inside the person, but rather what's happened to the person. So you think about things like trauma and stress and the environment, and we at TTOC are pretty sensitive to those things as well. So Steve, thank you for getting us sort of kicked off a question kicking us off in the right direction, and I'm happy to see you.
Thank you for that, Jason. So we also have another question here. So first, I say thank you for a fantastic presentation. As what specific strategies would you recommend for messaging for upstream suicide prevention to this population and their allies?
Suicide prevention. Can you? I'm unclear as to. I want to make sure I answer the question right, but upstream messaging, is that like sort of like education about the importance of suicide prevention?
Yeah, I think feel free to hop in, Ruben, but I think along the lines of, if I'm understanding it correctly, along the lines of thinking kind of ahead of any issues, really kind of thinking well in advance in terms of prevention and kind of intervening early, not just intervening in terms of when an issue arises, but intervening in general in the population with preventive messaging and so on.
Yes,
But
that's, thank you, Dr. Schiffman. We're trying to do some, effective messaging, right, in the community, and we approach the entire community. So let's say an agency might be putting out some messaging either on social media or maybe having some events that promote connectedness within the community. And yet, if there are individuals, that we're trying to reach out, especially the youth, how do we effectively reach out to them? Of course, with being aware of stigmatizing messaging or whatnot. But so I think just trying to see what are the best ways to reach out, maybe even to their allies.
Okay, great question, and a comprehensive answer that I don't have all of it too. And in fact, I'd love to just sit down and talk to you about what you've learned so far and what's worked and what hasn't. I think the answer is going to depend on the community with whom you're working, and not just sort of like, I mean, almost at like a very local level, but then sort of regional in the county and then in the state. I think some things to think about include just basic psychoeducation, like what are risks, signs, and stuff. In fact, actually, I was just giving a training right before I joined you all, that about psychosis, and this is a flyer that we sometimes use in some of our messaging, from NIMH, National Institute of Mental Health, that gives like very like sort of like generic, easy to digest bullet points about warning signs for allies and community members, and then some resources like 988 or the crisis text line and the like. So some education like this when it comes to like our area of specialty with psychosis risk, which is probably not what you're focusing in on, but the problem of suicide is really high for people that have a variety of different mental health challenges. Like in my field, um, like two out of every three, so about 66% of people at risk for psychosis will have active suicidal ideation, and one in every five will report a past suicide attempt. So the numbers are pretty high. The thing that I think is somewhat universal that can be helpful is wrapping the loved one around with support. Now, that comes after some of the things that you're probably working on and that David is talking about, like reducing stigma, because that's like kind of where like the more, I think, community level action is. But once we reduce stigma and find somebody that's reporting suicidality and we're trying to address it, the protocol that we recommend is something called youth nominated support teams. And basically what that does is it intentionally wraps the client around with natural supports and brings those natural supports into the therapy. This is sort of an experimental project that we're doing that has some complications because most therapy is like sort of one-on-one, but this intentionally brings in people. So if you're familiar with safety planning, one of the first things you do with a safety plan is identify like three people the person can talk to. Maybe it's the mom, and maybe it's an aunt, maybe it's the gym teacher, and then you as a therapist, that's it. You just give them the piece of paper, and so let's say maybe a week later they call the gym teacher, and the gym teacher's like, I don't understand why you're calling me. I don't know how to help you. Our program instead intentionally brings the gym teacher in, calls the gym teacher first, and says, hey, you've been nominated to be a support person in this. Here's some ideas about mental health. Here's some things that this young person is struggling with specifically. These are ways in which you can provide support to them. And so anyway, a long-winded answer. I have a lot to say about preventing suicide, and I'm very passionate about doing so. But hopefully some of that helped. But I think you are maybe like the upstream part is really important as well. And I'm so happy that you're working on that. I'm sorry that you're grappling with it, but it's a hard it's a hard nut to crack, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe one more question. I see Steve had a follow-up question in the chat. Would we who encounter a person with psychosis be supportive and helpful and empower us to do no harm and add positive acceptance? I want to make sure I'm understanding you, Steve, here. So the question is, what are some things that those of us who encounter someone experiencing psychosis can do to be supportive and helpful and be empowered to do no harm and add positive acceptance? If I'm understanding you correct.
Yeah. My understanding of that question, I mean, I think it's a beautiful question, and it's a question that we should all be thinking about at some level. And I have a feeling that like if we had more time together, it would be better for me to just like turn that question around to everyone and kind of open it up. And in fact, if people are so inspired, you know, like sometimes we call it waterfall in the Zoom. So like if you have ideas about this, like just throw that into the chat, you know. And Steve, I'm sure that you would be the first person that would have really good and important ideas to share with us in there. So I want to hear your voice through the chat if you're so inclined. But for me, I think, you know, you heard my emphasis on this idea that we're all far more similar than we are different. And, you know, sometimes just expressing your own humanity is way more powerful than any drug or even like formal psychosocial therapeutic approach. I mean, just knowing like looking someone in the eye and asking them if they're okay, being warm and authentic, empathic. These are the things that I think anyone would want, irrespective of the challenge that they're experiencing, whether or not it's psychosis. And I think these things would be true for psychosis as well. So be loving and kind, and that's where I would land on that question. Then the rest, that's like not, I'd say that's 95% of it, and then the rest, the 5% is the specialty stuff, in my opinion. But if you have thoughts, throw them in that chat and just let's waterfall that, because that would be a great. I'd love to hear what you all think.
That would be great.
Don't put anything in the chat. I'm just going to assume that you agree with me.
Well, Jason, thank you. That really was a fantastic presentation. And I know I drew a lot from it, even having seen portions of it in the summer. I think, you know, seeing it afresh, and I'm really appreciative that you're willing to share the slides with everyone. I drew a lot from it. I'm hoping that everyone else did. Seems so. And why don't we then we'll shift and move on to Chung. I want to hear about the services that directly at Thrive Together OC is providing and how folks can access those services and so on.
Thank you, David. Good morning, and thank you again for having us here today. My name is Chung Nguyen. I am the Clinical Service Manager for Thrive Together OC. We are a program funded by the Orange County Healthcare Agency. At Thrive Together OC, also known as TTOC, we offer no-cost screenings, assessments, and consultations for youth and young adults at risk for psychosis. Our mission is to improve outcomes for youth at clinical high risk by doing, again, screenings, assessing the youth and young adults ages 12 to 25, consulting with individuals, families, providers, and affiliate professionals, educating the community to facilitate early identifications and effective care, and promptly linking individuals and families to available resources. Our program criteria for screenings and assessments, the youth and the young adults, is for the services is for Orange County residents, again, ages 12 to 25 at clinical high risk. An individual, guardian, or providers can refer to TTOC in one of three ways. They can scan our QR code. As I'm talking, my colleagues will go ahead and drop in the chat box our flyer as well as our referral form. You can scan the QR code or visit our website to complete a HIPAA-compliant primary screener to determine eligibility. From the primary screeners, the youth would be able to answer the 8 to 12 questions about their symptoms, and from there on, if they are eligible, it would indicate it that they are eligible for an intake appointment with us. Please provide us with some availability to schedule an appointment. If they don't want to do the screeners, they can call Thrive Together OC directly to complete the screening with us over the phone, or the provider can call us directly to make the referral. Another way to refer to us is that providers can also fill out the referral form and email it to us at our inbox. All that information will be provided through our flyers and the chat. So need to keep in mind that our referrals team eligible for services from the primary screener will receive a follow-up call from Thrive Together OC within 24 to 48 hours. If you happen to refer someone over to us, please let them know that they should anticipate a call from us. And for whatever reasons they do not hear from us, please let them know that they can call our main office to follow up on the status of the referral. We always call the referral, however, sometimes the line doesn't go through or they didn't get the message. So we also ask that individuals refer to us, let them know that they can call us directly. And our services are offered remotely to telehealth, through telehealth, or in person. The languages that we offer are Spanish, Vietnamese, and English. And so in a nutshell, that's how to make a referral over to us, our program criteria, and the services that we offered. So David will go ahead and email you the flyer as well so you can share with the group.
Thank you, Chung. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Jason. I don't know that Raquel was able to join, but thank you, Raquel, as well for the recording. But I'm excited that you all, I'm excited that you all exist. I'm excited for the work that you all are doing. I'm excited that folks are going to have increased access to it. And I'm really excited, especially to see the kind of impact that this can have for folks and for families and for the community. So thank you all. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you all for sharing the resources and for joining us this morning. We'll take the time now to shift and do a couple of the other things that are on our agenda. I'll pass it on to my colleague, Sarah, to share about any updates that the coalition has, and then we'll move on to any the updates that you all may have to share.
Awesome. Thank you, David. And thank you, TTOC team, for just all the work you do, and Jason for your presentation. It was so interesting, and just I learned so much personally from it. So it's really awesome to be able to have that in my little toolkit as I go through my career as well. So yeah, we just have a couple of updates for you all. One of them is just we do have a couple of resource fairs that we're currently planning for at various colleges and universities. We are still in the planning stages of some. So if you want to actually table at our resource fairs or just participate in some way, please email us. We would love to connect you to these schools and have you get involved with us in that way. So definitely let us know. I will put my email in the chat right now so that you can have it, and just reach out if you want to be a part of our resource fairs coming up in the next this year. Also, we are always looking for transitional aged youth and young adults to be featured in our TAY spotlights and our newsletters. So if you know of anybody that is passionate about the mental health field and community that is in that 16 to 24 range, please connect them with us so that we can highlight them and help them have a voice to just share their passions and share their stories as well. And I have another special announcement from Higher Ground Youth and Family Services. They are actually looking for an LMFT to provide supervision to MFT trainees and interns, and it's a part-time position, and it has a potential to be full-time. So I'm going to put the contact info for that in the chat as well, so that oh, Crystal already did it. Perfect. Thanks, Crystal. But yeah, if you're interested or you know someone that's interested, please have them connect to Joe to get involved with that, and we can hopefully fill that position. But yeah, so I'm going to turn it over to you all. If you have any partner updates that you'd like to share with the rest of us, please feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat or whatever you feel comfortable. Anyone? Don't be shy. Okay, well, if nobody has any updates or anything, have a great weekend, everyone. Oh, thank you, Steve. The Behavioral Health Advisory Board. Okay, yeah. Thanks, Steve. We would love to have you all. We will reach out to you in the future regarding that as well. So yeah, anyway, if there's no other updates, thank you so much everyone for joining us and for Thrive Together OC for being featured in our coalition meeting today. Yeah, have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.